Today, the village faced its demons. 5 years have passed since Sierra and Green took me to the forest. A lifetime in so many ways. The world has endured wars and a pandemic. But that reality seems so distant and detached from our village's bubble. Since that momentous winter gathering, the villagers have reconciled with one another. Maria and I were together now. I have promised to be a better partner. An arduous road led to that juncture. You see, it was never a question of whether I had told the truth in the town meeting. Nobody doubted the insidious nature of the highlands. Even those who had not ever walked the woods. We'd all seen things. We'd all felt things. No, this was about forgiving deceit more than overcoming disbelief. Following my brush with death, Tommy accompanied me on shifts, though Maggie didn't like him doing so. I wasn't keen on the old man doing it either. His arthritis was worsening, but he insisted that someone needed to look after me. He still views me as the boy he met 20 years ago. Speaking of which, Henry is 16-year-old. An adult, apparently. Then again, I shouldn't tease him. Maria and I were only 6 years older than him when we moved to this place. A horrifying thought. This morning, as I sat in my watchtower and basked in the warm glow of sunrise, a sudden knock jolted me from my chair. I spilled my cup of tea and sighed heavily, before swiveling around to face the door. Outside the window there was a man stood, with whom I didn't recognize. "May I enter?" he called. The man spoke with an English accent which left me leery. "Not until I know your name and why you're here," I said, reaching out for Matthew's old revolver beneath my desk. Not a legal firearm, of course, but my duties aren't exactly the same as those of normal rangers. "You don't know me," the man said, "but my name is Darren Grayson. I came across your story. I can't help you." "I've heard that before." "May I enter?" he asked again. "Yes," I said, hurriedly sliding the gun under my jacket. Darren opened the door and shuffled inside. He was around my age, and he bore a similar tired, disheveled look, scruffy facial hair, and crooked crow's feet. The man sat on the edge of my desk, a few feet from me, and I surveyed him curiously. "What are you doing here, Darren Grayson?" I asked. "I come here from a hamlet over the ridge," he replied, "and it—" "Get out," I coldly interrupted, sliding the weapon from my coat. Darren's eyes widened as he quickly slid off the desk. "Come to avenge Siren? Is that it?" I asked, narrowing my eyes, raising the revolver. "Siren?" Darren asked. How do you know that name?" "Your friend came here 5 years ago," I muttered. "He promised to save my village too." Darren raised his hands. "Listen, I don't know what happened, but Siren was a very dangerous man." "Please leave," I said. "When you shared your story with the world, it found its way to me," Darren continued. "I'm not going to tell you again," I hissed. "He's dead, Peter," Darren said. "Siren's dead." "I know. Shirley Pond killed him." "What?" Darren asked. "No, he died a year ago. He tried to sacrifice me to the forest folk. But they claimed him." He made it back to the hamlet?" I replied, eyes wide. "Yes. Why does it matter? He's dead. I saw it happen." "That's what I thought too," I said. Darren paused for a moment. "I have good reason to believe that this time he died for good. That's why I'm here, Peter. The forest folk have perished." "The old factory workers?" I asked. Darren nodded. "It happened in early spring. I sounded the alarm when they emerged from the forest. But they collapsed in the snow, one by one. We watched their bodies for days, waiting for signs of movement. They slowly started to rot, and then, with unnatural haste, the forest reclaimed them. It was like nothing I'd ever seen." "What does this have to do with Siren's death?" I asked. "Something came from the forest, Peter, a skeletal thing." "The woman?" "Woman?" he asked. "No, it wasn't anything remotely resembling a man or woman. It was a body constructed of entwined branches, it whispered to me, "The rotten seed has been purged from this land." I paused. "Siren?" "Siren," Darren agreed. "No single thing poisoned our land. This infection has festered for a century or more, worsened by tragedy after tragedy. Perhaps since people first settled in the highlands, perhaps it infects all places to some degree, and it's spread by people," I finished. Darren nodded. "People. Perhaps in our two hometowns, we have been misfortunate enough to experience one too many tragedies. The Greens had a long history of causing pain and suffering. It began long before Siren. It was his great-grandfather who ran the factory, Lachlan Green, a tyrant who employed young boys and girls for a pittance. He forced them to work in terrible conditions, no sunlight, scarce food. Many of the children developed rickets, and when they died a young unnatural death, the forest claimed them. They joined the legions of the undead. They were sentenced to an afterlife in the highlands. Most likely they came to our hamlet seeking revenge for Lachlan Green's injustice. They only ever wanted his great-grandson," I said. Darren nodded. "Yes, and after they were finally laid to rest, I could have left the highlands with my family, but our hamlet has become a quiet, beautiful place. It was only when you shared your tale of horror that I realized this disease spreads beyond the ridge." "So you think something rotten lives in this village?" I asked. The man nodded. "There was the school teacher who killed those children," I started. "Arnold Haversham?" Darren asked. "He's dead. He died nearly 30 years ago." I stalled, rubbing my chin thoughtfully. "Like you said, it's never one thing that poisons a land, it's a generational trauma." Darren nodded. "Arnold mustn't have been the only evil at work. But I know these people. They're my neighbors and friends. I don't want to imagine a wolf living among us," I said. "Well, Siren was a beloved leader," Darren explained. "Dark things always hide in plain sight. The things I see in these woods are so often tied to that school," I said. "Nearly every night, I see that building amidst the trees. Somebody knows in this town something," Darren said. I recalled a detail that had played on my mind for years. A joke Tommy made during the meeting in 2018 before Maggie interrupted him. He was on the verge of calling the mayor Mrs. Aversham. I was certain of it. "Come on," I said. "We're going to see a friend." "Oh?" Darren replied, climbing to his feet. "I think he might know something about the people Arnold left behind." We drove back to the village, and I anxiously twiddled my thumbs as we pulled onto Tommy's driveway. I didn't want to apprehend the man, but time was slipping through our fingers. Too many decades had been spent under the gnarled, decaying thumbnail of whatever lay beneath the highlands. "I don't know why I said that about Eileen," Tommy nervously stuttered. "It was a stupid joke to make." "What was the joke?" I asked. The man sighed exasperatedly. "Who's your friend?" "Darren Grayson," the companion replied, outstretching his hand. "Oh, great," Tommy laughed. "It's a blooming invasion of the English folk." "Tommy, tell me what you know," I said. "Nothing, Peter, it was just a joke," he insisted. "Mrs. Aversham, was she married to Arnold Aversham?" I asked. Tommy laughed, and then he stopped immediately upon seeing my face. "What's so funny?" I asked. The man paused for a second before sighing. Took me back to my days on the force. Investigating crimes, Tommy was a lovely man, but he didn't perform well under pressure. My persistence finally wore him down. "I still got it," I thought to myself. "Eileen was Arnold's sister," he muttered. "She changed her name after everything. We all loved her, so we never blamed her. We made her the mayor, for crying out loud." "Is she his only surviving family?" "Why? What's the use in dredging up the past, Peter?" Tommy asked. There might be a way to end all of this, I said. The man eyed me uncertainly. I sighed. 30 years have passed since Arnold Aversham took those lives, but the evil in the forest lingers, and it won't extinguish until we stamp out every last weed. Weed? What are you saying? Tommy asked. He's saying that evil lives here, Darren said. Right in the heart of your village. Tommy scoffed. You believe this? Do you, Peter? One of her friends, perhaps someone in one of her families. That school has haunted the forest for decades, it says. Calls to me. There has to be a reason for that. There has to be something that we all missed. Well, Arnold Haversham is dead, Tommy said. What more is there to say? Terrible thing happened, and the forest hasn't forgotten that. Trauma stains the highlands of the dead. That's how you've always explained it, Peter. Well, what do I know? What do any of us know? I replied. But if Darren's story about lifting the curse happens to be true, it is true, Darren promised. Well, I said, I think we should go and talk to the mayor. Tommy sighed. It's not Eileen who can help you. Then who can help us? I asked. The man cleared his throat. Her mother, Geraldine Neversham. She's still alive? I asked incredulously. He nodded. Yeah. She keeps to herself, old Victorian built by the lake at the forest edge. You know the one. The rundown shack off the A road? I said. It's always looked abandoned to me, haunted. Might as well be. Nobody but Eileen has seen Geraldine since Arnold did. Those terrible things. She didn't speak. Doesn't even eat without assistance. There's nothing but a ghost in her place, Tommy said. It's a sad thing. She was the heart and soul of the village for many years. We all missed her. But Eileen says her mother just won't face the world. So she probably wouldn't talk to us, Darren asked. Tommy shook his head. We have to try, I said, with Tommy anxiously watching from the driveway. Darren and I hopped into the car. We drove to the lake. For today, I hardly noticed the Victorian heritage of the ramshackle abode. There was nothing grand or glamorous about the neglected home. It was little more than a forgotten farmhouse, an eyesore that I'd never inspected during my 20 years in Highlands, a feeble structure held together by the flimsy foundations. Much like everything and everyone in the village. That's Eileen's car, I said as Darren parked alongside a grey Range Rover. Might be for the best that she's here, Darren said, removing the key from ignition. You know Eileen. She might be able to help Geraldine talk. Yeah, I said. As we exited the vehicle, nerves constricted my gut. I eyed the ancient house with mistrust, gingerly treading on cracked, grass-ridden stonework. We stepped onto the wooden porch before Geraldine's door, but it wasn't just the rickety, unreliable floorboards that filled me with unease. It was the atmosphere of our mid-afternoon house call. The lake was unnervingly still, but the woods swayed unstably, beckoning us to enter. I couldn't imagine living at the foot of the frightful forest by choice. Darren knocked on Geraldine's door, and we waited several minutes. Maybe we should. When Eileen answered, she was flustered and horrified to see us. Peter! Who are you? Peter! What are you? Who's this? She asked. Darren Grayson, I answered. He comes from the hamlet beyond the ridge, and he's got a lot of nerve. I had interjected, eyeing Darren coldly. Sierra and Green tried to condemn the people of this village to... I know, Darren said. I know that Mayor Balfour. But he's gone now, and we can fix everything. Our hamlet is free from the dead. My phone buzzed, and I pulled it out of my pocket whilst the pair continued talking. It was Maria. I thought. I forgot to take Henry to school. I hurriedly texted my wife to apologize, and I explained that I was at Geraldine Aversham's house. She replied to say that Henry was already having a bad day. He was worried about the future university, something he would never get to experience if he were truly trapped in the village forever. Everything okay, Peter? Darren asked. Yeah, it can wait. I said, putting my phone back into my pocket. Did you explain everything? It's not happening, Peter, Alan insisted. My mother won't talk to you. She doesn't talk to anyone. If we could just see her, I started. I said no, Alan shouted, slamming the door in our faces. That was odd, Darren said, sighing. Another dead end. I didn't spend many years in police officer before moving to Highlands. I would hardly call myself a world-renowned detective, and yet it was undeniable. Eileen is hiding something, I said. Darren frowned. Is she not just being protective? Her family has endured a lot. No, her demeanor was off. And I'm thinking about what Tommy said. Geraldine was a beloved member of the community, and she has lived as a social recluse for nearly 30 years? No friends or family to visit her? Grief is a wretched thing, Darren said, sighing. I don't deny that, I said. I think Tommy and the other villagers buy that tale, but you don't trust Eileen, Darren said. No, I replied. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I'd never really trusted her. There had always been something evasive about that woman. She was a person of few words. A select few words. As Darren and I stood on the porch, contemplating our next move, a creak sounded from the rear of the house, the sound of a door opening. And that's her? Darren asked. Only one way to know for sure, I said, motioning for the neighborhood watchman to follow me. As we crept around the slide of the derelict of the house, I noticed a large window coated in assorted forms of overgrowth. I'm not sure what possessed me, but it was more than piqued curiosity. I found myself tearing this vine's shrubbery away. Then I began to scrub the window's filth with the sleeve of my jacket. Darren, I whispered, you might want to see this. Through a cleaned loophole I had formed in the center of the glass pane, you could see Geraldine's living room. It was illuminated by the midday sunlight, and on a dusty, neglected armchair there sat a pile of ashy clothes with the vague posture of a sitting person. Is that? Darren started, quivering. Geraldine Aversham, I said. Darren and I did not say any more than that. We raced into the forest, keenly pursuing Eileen. She fled at a quickened pace, but her footprints betrayed her. When we reached a sprawling clearing in the woods, I know we'd found her secret. What is that? Darren asked breathlessly. The entrance to hell, I said. The ground had parted to reveal horrors in the hollow beneath, just as it did 20 years ago. And buried amongst mounds of soil and rocks, the twisted version of the village school stared back at us. It did not rise proudly above the tree line as it once had. It was a sunken wreckage, hiding in an inexplicable chasm. The building lay on its back, with its front doors facing the sky. Wait, Darren said, as I jumped into the ditch. What are you doing? I carefully tiptoed across the building, gulping as the brickwork groaned beneath my feet. She's in here, I said, pointing at the muddy footprints of the wooden doors. I know, but don't open those doors. Are you crazy? He asked. Nothing is ever as it seems in this forest, I said, smiling and stamping. The doors swung open. I fell forwards, but I did not endlessly plummet through a downward-facing corridor. Gravity shifted, and I tumbled to the tile floor of the haunted, lightless school. When I turned to look at the doors behind me, motion sickness seized my body. There was something truly ghastly about just seeing the trees and sky at the right angle. It was made all worse by Darren's sideways body sliding into the view. The man sighed, climbing down the hall. He tumbled through the doorway and fell onto his face. I feel a little sick, Darren muttered, as we both stumbled to our feet. Then don't look behind you, I said, nodding at my head at the doors. As I started to walk down the corridor, I heard the man pivot to see what I meant. He swiftly retched on the floor. Consumed by that building's darkness, I fumbled my coat pocket to find my torch. And when I lit up the hallway, I was 20 years younger. My mind returned to that very first night in the Highlands. Nothing more than a frightened boy in a haunted house. After so many years, the terror had not abated. Some horrors lie beyond what our primal brains can conceive. We strolled cautiously through the school, and following trail of mud down a weaving maze of hallways, and then came to that door. That horrible door. Classroom 11A. There was movement inside. I turned on the flashlight, and I motioned Darren to crouch down. They want to win everything, my darling. A voice sobbed from the inside the room. Darren and I peeked over the bottom of the classroom window. Aileen was inside, but that wasn't what terrified us. She was talking to a looming ghoul, a corpse that I recognized. Arnold Aversham. The malformed monstrosity that had caused so much death and suffering. And as it leaned towards Eileen, its voice carried an inaudible, unearthly tone. I know, my love. I'll bring you your little ones, I promise, she cooed, stroking her undead brother's cheek. Things have been difficult. That same icy, inhuman whisper sounded. Yes, Arnold, the ranger. He's brought someone to the village, and... Another whisper sharply sliced into her sentence. Oh, Eileen said, I see. Then her eyes shot to the window. She and her haunted sibling looked at Darren and me with equally black, lifeless eyes. Before we could rise to our feet, Arnold's arm had elongated. The door was wrenched from its hinges, and our bodies were dragged into the classroom by the murderous schoolteacher's undead fingers. He held us down as the mayor walked over to our writhing bodies. The withered, gray-haired woman sighed before squatting to my eye level. Do you love your family, Peter? She asked. Would you do anything for them? I have always loved my brother. Nobody else did. Not the father who left us. Not our insufferable goody-two-shoes mother. Even when Arnold became a schoolteacher following her in her footsteps, he still wasn't good enough. But we silenced her ceaseless chattering and nagging. Didn't we, Arnold? You're unwell, Eileen, I croaked, as Arnold's terrifying fingers constricted my breath. That's what they all said to my sweet brother, she moaned, clenching her fists. Yes, he struggled to socialize. He didn't want to wear the mask that was thrust upon him. But he was different. He was pure. And those children... Ghostly, muffled wails sounded beyond the walls. They were spoiled brats, Eileen snarled. They should have been honored that Arnold chose them. They were the purest of the bunch, and he wanted to be with them forever. What purer love can there be? As for you, the woman walked over to Darren Grayson. The cleanser of Highlands, death follows in your wake, doesn't it, Mr. Grayson? But your story ends here. This is our land, she shrieked, clasping her hands around Darren's throat. And when I'm done with two of you, I'll pay a visit to your little hamlet, Mr. Grayson. Perhaps you have some pretty young playthings for my beautiful brother. In a sudden blur of motion, Darren plunged a knife into Island's abdomen. I hadn't seen his arm wriggle free of his raised restraints. The deranged woman howled in excruciating pain, clutching her wounded torso and stumbling backwards. Her inhuman brother released us, and he rushed to his sister's aid, cradling her in her rotting arm. Darren and I quickly scrambled to our feet. Is it over? I asked, backing towards the door. If she dies, Darren replied, joining me. The forest needs to be freed from... The forest? Aileen spluttered, laughing. I've never understood this fascination with trees and earth. I am the Highlands. Before we could respond, a sinister spectacle unfolded. Arnold Aversham's deformed body enveloped Eileen. His rotten flesh merged with hers, and the pair formed a singular abomination of decay and evil. I recognized the outline of the monstrosity before me, the horror that had dropped my baby from the watchtower. Had my boy been intended as a prize for her brother? The 10-foot-tall entity lumbered towards us, twitching near flesh-like legs. Its giant form was bent sideways as it could scarcely fit the room, and it only kept growing. Darren and I ran, of course. I'm out of ideas, Peter, the man cried as we sprinted down the corridor. Yup, I shouted in response. The creature was pursuing without pause for breath, and its nearing growls made it quite apparent that we were not going to escape. The hellhound was too fast. and as we neared the school's entryway, I became aware of the floor's dampness. "Peter?" Darren started. "I know," I replied. "Smells like petrol." As we turned onto the final stretch of the corridor, facing the outer world, I saw something entirely unexpected. In the entrances of the school, silhouetted by the day's dying light, a man and a woman stood anxiously. I could distinguish the outlines, and I know who they were. "Is that Tommy?" Peter asked, panting. "And Maria," I said. "Hurry!" Tommy yelled. Before I could respond, I was swept from my feet. My body somersaulted into the school lockers like a limp rag doll, and my revolver clattered to the floor. I looked up at the enormous annihilator, the monster that had tormented our village for 30 years. A monster, it seemed, of two halves, two monstrous siblings. It had to die. And as I lay in a thick trail of petrol, I started to piece together the plan Tommy and Maria had made. When we were clear of the school, they planned to set the building ablaze. However, Darren didn't run towards the exit. He beelined for the revolver. "Get out of here," I cried. The aversion abomination clutched Darren by the neck and hoisted him into the air. I saw the fear in the man's eyes as the unholy monster began howling in his face. Not wasting a moment, I stumbled to my feet and scooped up the firearm before aiming at the creature's arm. I prayed I would not miss. Prayed I would not hit Darren by mistake. After removing the safety, I fired. The aversion creature screeched in agony, and its fingers reflexively released Darren's neck. "Come on," I shouted, pulling the man to his feet. We scurried towards the exit, and I could see Maria fiddling with something. Our trusty lighter from home. Not so trusty these days, I remembered. I watched both Tommy and my wife fiddle with the device, while sweat dripped down their faces. When Darren and I reached the entrance, we turned to face the aversions. A seemingly unwounded monster hurtled towards us. "Peter!" Tommy cried. Darkened, unnaturally long limb had silently spiraled around the corridor, merging with the forest overgrowth. I hadn't seen it slither towards me, but I felt it yank my body to the ground. A revolver flew from my hand again, and the beast began to pull me to its domain. "Peter!" Maria screamed, bending to pick up my dropped weapon. "Let him go!" Gunshot rang out, tearing into the creature's deteriorating flesh. I used a split-second distraction to stamp on the monster's arm, and it loosened its undead fingers, freeing me from its grip. I shuffled backwards, joining the others at the entrance. Maria fired again. The second bullet didn't connect with the monster, but she wasn't aiming for it. The petrol trail burst into flames. The fire spread at such speed that the aversion were already engulfed before they could screech in terror. We carefully backed out of the school, tumbling to the safety blanket of the forest floor, and I breathed a sigh of relief to find myself facing the right way up. Gravity had been restored. The four of us watched the inferno consume the school, while paper-withered ceilings collapsed and the shrieking abomination fell to its knees. A raging fire burned that unhallowed place to charred ruins. We waited. None of us believed it would be over until the monstrosity had turned to ash. And then, when nothing of the aversion abomination remained, the ground began to quake. The four of us stepped back, allowing the forest to reseal above the spectral school. Dirt piled into the cavity, grass rebuilt itself, and the air warmed. The highlands fell quiet, as if nothing ever happened. "Look," Darren whispered, pointing at the movement in the trees. A branch-like entity emerged, and it was followed by a blinding ray of sunlight, like a heavenly being. The phantom matched the description of the phenomena that Darren had described, the being that came after the cleansing of this hamlet. With trepidation, we watched the woodland creature slink into the empty clearing. It eyed us with what I presumed to be its face, and then it ceremoniously planted its roots into the soil. Slowly but surely, the creature transformed into a large pine tree, sprouted luscious green leaves and bloomed vibrantly. The proud pine rose a foot taller than the surrounding trees, and its colorful leaves distinguished it from the rest of the barren wintry forest. The freshly grown tree lightened the air, a hard thing to explain, but it did just that. The weightiness of the forest lifted. "I feel freer," Tommy said. "Thank you," I whispered to my wife, embracing her. "It's over. We can live again." cheerfully said, "I pray that this marks a new chapter for our village. These will always be the highlands of the dead, but the dead can finally rest."